There comes a point for many of us when we feel lost, like something essential is missing in our life. And so we begin the journey of the seeker. And we begin to search the world in all four directions for peace, for substance, for love. We look in the quietude of the forest and in nature. We look to the silence of the sky. We look to the stillness of the sunrise, and though we catch glimpses of peace, they come and go, and somehow we can't hold on to them. We even look to find comfort through our possessions. We look to find a sense of feeling important and valuable through positions and titles, and through relationships. And the only reason we search so deeply is because at some point we had the beauty we feel we've lost. And then the day arrives when we go on the right journey, away from the external, into our own being. There comes a time when the seeker goes within and lets go of all the stories of the world, lets go of all their memories and baggage, and the seeker becomes quiet and finds that the door they had been looking for is within them. When we enter into that door, there is a sacred, beautiful, precious stillness of the soul. And in this stillness we know that we are absolutely divine and connected to the Supreme and Beautiful One. And all of a sudden it becomes very clear that those little pieces of peace we got through looking at the forest or the beauty of the sunset, those were only reflections of the beauty of the soul. They were only mirrors that reminded me that that kind of beauty exists within me. And so the seeker's journey comes to an end when we enter the door of our mind and go into the sanctuary of the soul, unleashing our beauty into the world.
Good day. Welcome to Meditation Cafe. Proudly presents our 12th program for this year. It's a milestone for Meditation Cafe with this beautiful program on finishing expectations. And we have a lot more in the future awaiting you to help serve you better. So I'm your host for tonight, Dimple. Expectation. Beautiful word. Do we have expectations? Is it good to have expectation? Or does it cause us harm? Do we have questions? Why, what, how? So a little housekeeping before I begin. We have translations for you available. We have translation in Chinese and Tamil. You can click on the interpretation and you can select your language of preference. Also, we have a Q&A at the end of the session. Please type in your questions in the chat box. Feel free to type in your questions anytime, and I will be more than happy to put these questions forward to you too. Peter Clark, our speaker for the topic, finishing expectation. It was so nice talking to Peter Clark. Peter Clark has been a meditation practitioner for over or almost 40 years. That's a long time. And he currently resides in Brisbane, in Australia. And he manages between part-time job and also classes, meditation classes in Brahma Kumaris. And we're so proud to have this topic from him. A little bit about him. Peter has a very colorful childhood. I was very, very impressed when he told me that as a young teenager, he had a seeking for knowledge. And that was surprising because at that age, at the tender age of teenager, you don't seek for spirituality. At least I didn't. So it was really nice. And even understanding Peter's background, how he coped with certain addictions, you know, it's really beautiful. It's so wonderful to understand how he mastered his own expectation. And to have this talk, finishing expectation, Peter mentioned a little bit about the word should. Is it that we should do something? And this is so beautifully mentioned by him. And I would not further delay and let Mr. Peter Clark, take it for you. And Om Shanti, Peter, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Dimple. It's really, really lovely to be here. Thank you for that warm introduction. And I found it quite an intriguing topic, the topic of expectations and the idea of finishing them somehow. It's a big thing. It's like a big ask to anyone in the world, because I guess in a way we feel quite often in the world that we have a right to have expectations. And I suppose in some ways we sort of do. On one level we do. And yet, even whilst we would expect certain things out of life, certain behaviours out of people, and so on, and they of us, of course, at the same time, the notion of expectations and the fact that we harbour them within us causes us a great deal of problems. And that's on a daily level. And so tonight's session is really all about highlighting what that is all about, highlighting what expectations means, having expectations, dealing with expectations of others, our own expectations, and ultimately how to rise above them. I was really tossing up in my own mind as to, you know, what is the better term anyway? Finishing them, letting go of them, rising above them. I think in some ways, you know, all of those are perhaps, you know, just ideas that we can use in order to deal with them ultimately, and, you know, go beyond them, not have them in anymore. So I'm actually going to use a few different backgrounds here that just have a few prompting words on them. So the whole notion of what an expectation really is. I did like this one just because it's quite straightforward, a strong belief. And I think that word there is really key. A belief that something should happen or be the case, that something should be in a certain way, you know, present itself in a certain shape and form at a certain time, and so on. So that notion of expectations, yeah, it's It's me thinking or believing that this should be the case. This person should be like this. I should be like this. This situation should be like this. This should happen on time. And all sorts of deeper things like, others shouldn't expect of me, and perhaps I shouldn't expect that others shouldn't expect of me. So what do we do when others have expectations of us? Yeah. So what happens? How do these expectations come about anyway? I would say, maybe to put it in a sort of a simple way, we expect, I guess, or we want, let's say, we want for stability and certainty in our lives. We want a sense of stability. Everyone wants a sense of stability. Sometimes it's sort of fun not to have stability there for a short time, but people always expect things to resolve. Even when there's instability, we expect that they should come good. And like, I guess if you were watching a movie or something like that, bad things happen, but then you sort of expect them to resolve somehow at the end. Then we can all think, oh, we all live happily ever after. We can go home happy, There's that sort of thing. So certainty, a sense of knowing what's going to happen, knowing what happens when I say this, what happens when I do this. That sense of certainty provides us with stability. The two things go hand in hand, really. Yeah. And we want for feelings also of happiness and well-being within ourselves. And I guess we we come to expect those things. We expect stability around us, and that, that's the way that I have my stability internally, and we expect things to work out. And so we can, have these feelings of happiness and well-being in our lives. And the fact is that somewhere in our conscious mind or subconscious mind, actually what I should say is conscious mind and subconscious mind, there are these experiences. We have known stability. We have known certainty, a sense of certainty. We have had the feeling of happiness and well-being, peace of mind, and so on. Those things actually are recorded within us. And even if we don't have such a grasp on that in our current day life, basically this is a notion which is really important in terms of spiritual growth of the individual, and that is to have something internally that we can secure ourselves on. So in other words, even if I don't feel at peace right here, right now, then just the knowing that peace is in there somewhere. It's actually at the heart or at the core of our being. And all I really need to do is look for it and find it again. That's not something I can find around me. I could go out into nature and spend time and so on, but I'm going to come back to the world and face the same old problems as I had before I left. So, that's not very stable. And so really we want that stability. We want something a bit more long-term. And so on. And ultimately, we want something that exists within us, such that we don't have to look outside of ourselves to find it. So looking outside of ourselves, or having to look outside of ourselves, is a very unstable proposition. Because every day, every moment of every day, every person we meet, and their mood that they happen to be in today, and so on and so on. Everything like that is going to present a new range of circumstances. what I get to eat today may not be what I got to eat yesterday. Simple things like that, Yeah. So all of those things, when they break down somehow, even on a small level in our lives, we lose that sense of stability and certainty and happiness and so on. And so basically, what that really means or equals is that our expectations are not being met. So we expect that the world will deliver, that people will deliver. And of course, bear in mind that they're expecting the same of us. Yeah. So, okay. When something unexpected occurs, what happens? I guess this is actually really the same as saying when the expected doesn't occur. When something that is expected does not occur, this causes a ruffle in my feathers, so an instability, if you like. So in the same way, when something unexpected suddenly happens, well, I mean, that can do exactly the same thing. So the circumstances have changed. So of course, when we look at that statement there, it can actually imply something that is really quite sudden, very dramatic, and perhaps even very shocking. So of course, when something like that happens, someone who is sort of locked into their expectations, in a way you could also say locked into their comfort zone in life, is not going to handle that very well at all. They're going to get a big shock, and it'll be sudden, and it will also have a long fallout, it'll have a long effect on their life. And of course, if they go through a few of those, it all adds up, and their general overall well-being begins to fail them. Yeah. So when the unexpected occurs, ultimately, we'd like to think, I think we as experienced meditators would like to think that we can just deal with that when it happens. Something was unexpected, but there you go. We can accept that very rapidly and do a quick 180-degree turnaround and suddenly be flowing along with it rather than being at odds to it, and therefore there being some sort of friction or whatever. So we want for there not to be friction. We want for there to be a feeling of smoothness, a feeling of flow, and so on. Of course, in our, for a non-meditating person, they would say, "Oh, but you can't do that. That how dare that situation occur like that, or how dare that person say or do that thing?" And that, of course, is just blaming the circumstances on the outside world. True, someone may have been extremely rude. Something a bit nasty may have occurred, or even very nasty may have occurred. But someone who is experienced with their meditation will learn how to blend that in to the whole notion of a bigger notion of what we refer to as drama, like saying, well, it's all part of a big play. And if you went to see a play or a film, you wouldn't go, "Hey, that's not allowed," when the villain does something bad. You're not going to complain that the villain did something bad. It's a story. And of course, perhaps you are expecting a resolution by the end, or at least a good lesson in the whole thing anyway. Definitely there will be some resolution, and definitely there will be lots of lessons to be learned along the way. So, okay, when the unexpected occurs, I'm going to try and get these backgrounds right here. So, dealing with the expectations of others, this is a really huge thing. It's a massive thing, actually. We've all had to deal with that, And some of us are totally, I don't know how you say it, in Australia we say under the thumb, of other people. I'm not sure what expressions you use, but under the control of others. And I guess as a little person in life, we look up to these, primarily to these two adults, big people, who brought us into this life. And, we look to them as examples and so on. And so then we expect that, or they expect that we, in a way, repay them with our respect for them and support of them and so on in their old age. And nowadays, I think even more than ever, it happens especially, I think, in Eastern cultures, that parents, and in fact the whole family lines, expect that we really become something good with our lives, that we play out our lives in a certain way, and sometimes that way even happens to include in a way resolving the sort of failures that they may have had in their lives. So if they feel that they haven't turned out so well, or that things didn't go so well, they're expecting perhaps of us as their children to do better, to resolve that issue in the family, that things haven't gone so well. So that we've had a better, more successful marriage, a better, more successful career, and so on. So all of these sorts of things are playing out in our lives. Simple things too, of course. You go for a job and you get that job, and then of course your employer will expect that you perform up to the standards that they were hoping from you in the interview. And if you don't, then, well, there are repercussions. So that sort of expectation is there, So at all levels, really, in life, there are expectations. Even amongst friends, we're expected to uphold the values of our mates in life. And we're expected to uphold their honour, to stick by them, stay by them, stand by them, if you like, and all of that sort of thing, and offer them our shoulder, our friendship, our love whenever it's needed, And of course, this is happening two-way. So nowadays we find that actually we're in a world now where the expectation levels on in all ways, in all facets of life, are operating on very high levels, very, very high levels, and it's causing enormous stress, and those expectations are not in a very pure form at all. So quite often when we're expected to perform from our families, parents specifically, it's actually, I guess, to uphold the family name, the expectations of our family. And quite often that just means, I guess I'd have to be very blunt here and say this, but so often it means so that our parents can talk highly of us, and therefore of the family, and to others. And in some cases even, I guess, brag to others about what their children are doing and how well they're doing and all of this sort of thing. And of course it gets so competitive and whatnot. So how do we deal with that? Well, we need a lot of internal respect for ourselves. So self-respect is a huge thing here, not to be underestimated by any means, because the more self-respect we have, the less we will feel like we need to fulfill the expectations of others around us. Now, that's a really important statement. At the same time, it's a little risky in a sense, because I want to add here that also having true self-respect will also give us the ability to respect others. So in other words, we will have the ability to respect, say, let's take our parents, for instance. We will have the ability to respect our parents, but at the same time not feel obliged simply to live up to their expectations. So just because they're my parents, it doesn't mean that their expectations are pure and clean and untainted and all of that. They're just people. And some of us were fortunate. We had good people for parents, and some may not have had that situation in their life. But whatever the case, the more self-respect we have, the more respect we have for our own self, and that starts on a very inner level, the more respect we will have for them naturally, and the less we will simply feel like we have to try and live up to their expectations. Because that whole syndrome is just occurring out of fear, actually. Fear is the main driving force behind that, and it's a pretty low driving force. They talk about the difference between these two opposites, polar opposites in life, of love and fear. And they really are. They're polar opposites. We should be more driven by love, which is a very mysterious thing, of course. But I think the more we delve into a spiritual notion of that, the more we will understand it and experience it. And of course, we will avoid the opposite, feeling compelled to behave out of fear, And so remember that as children, often fear was a driving force there. We were afraid of those big people. They were 3 times, 4 times our size, and they had a lot of power over us. They were the ones who fed us and so on. And so we get into that habit, and it's still playing out even in our adulthood to a large degree. So perhaps more on that later if there's more time. But here's another one that's really, really interesting, the habit of expecting the worst. This is an interesting thing because, okay, we've been playing with the idea of how we expect more of ourselves, of how our friends, our families in particular, expect more out of us. But what happens if I have the habit of always expecting the worst? So cynicism, this notion where I'm always digging into how bad things are and also will be, or how bad I would expect them to be. Why would I expect them to be like that? Because, well, this is the way the world is, isn't it? This is the way people are, isn't it? And certainly this is the way that person is, isn't it? And so on. And so we create such a negative view of everything. And usually, in most of those cases where a person is obsessed by that sort of notion, and they have that deep habit, they're usually blaming something outside of themselves. The world, religion, their government, all governments. In the past, it would have been monarchs. God even, just, it's all senseless in a way. It's just pointing the finger, away from our own self and towards everything and everyone else. It's, of course, this exists because we feel like we've had a bad lot in life. And we've got this record. We're very good record keepers when we're like that. We've got this big long list in a book, you know, of misdemeanors that have been done against me, you know, and I will bring those out as sort of evidence that support my argument about how this notion now, about how this situation rather, is not turning out so well, is turning out, you know, for the worst, or is bound to turn out for the worst. Even though it hasn't even kicked in yet or started yet, I'm still expecting the worst. And I'm basing it on a whole long list of things which I have in my memory somehow, you know. So of course, if I happen to be a person who has that habit, then it's quite a, it would be a very big task to free myself from that. And yet, it's certainly not impossible by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that actually I would need a good, solid, daily spiritual practice to be able to deal with that. When I say spiritual too, I don't mean to sort of something airy-fairy there. I mean, I know probably a lot of people who are listening here do have a bit of a background with the Brahma Kumaris, but you know, there are probably people out there who don't. And so I guess when I say spiritual, I'm not meaning a whole range of, you know, fluffy ideas. I'm really meaning some good, solid principles based on some good, solid experiences that I can actually allow myself to have in meditation practice, you know, and they may even take time to develop, but it happens, yeah. So the more I have that practice, the experiences that I have in meditation, in a very practical way, will start to take over from my past negative experiences. So that list of cynical notions of the way things turn out is going to start to be dealt with. You know, you can cross out those things and replace them with the new things, the things of positive meditation experiences. Yeah, so now I wondered really whether I should put this one in or not, but I did, and here it is. The notions of suppression and repression. Yes, and one has a double P and the other one actually has a single P. But what do I mean here? And I've done a fair bit of looking around, you know, dictionary definitions of these words and so on. And I started to look into it quite a number of years ago when I first read a book called Don't Get Mad, Get Wise by Mike George. Mike is associated with the Brahma Kumaris in a very big way. He practices with us, but he's written quite a lot of books over the years, and I'd say this is really his first big book. And I remember buying it on the internet before it even reached Australian shelves. I had to buy it from the UK, and I'd read a review on it, and the reviewer said, when I read The Power of Now, which was a very famous self-help book, probably one of the most famous self-help books, when I read The Power of Now, I thought there'll never be another self-help book this good. Well, I was wrong. So I took that on board, and I got a hold of that, and I found quite a wealth of information there. And in fact, perhaps I could even also add, once our national coordinator in Australia asked Sister Shivani, you know, how she began her thinking with a lot of the concepts that she's presenting on a daily basis. And she said one of the first things she ever did was she started reading Mike George books. So there's a good tip for you. Anyway, but these two notions, I thought, when I read them in this book, Don't Get Mad, Get Wise, I thought this is really intriguing, you know. And basically what I was saying is, you know, don't express anger, but also don't suppress it and don't repress it. but ultimately transform it. And it's presenting a positive idea at the end, but then you have to ask yourself, what does this mean? Transform. So let's just go backwards a couple of steps anyway. Quite often when we have expectations and our boat gets rocked because things aren't turning out the way I want them to be, then Mike would have said in his book there that we start to experience frustration, second level of anger. First there's an irritation, which is almost just like a little scratch, but then there's frustration, where not just that we're waiting for something to happen, but where it has happened but it didn't turn out right, or it didn't turn out as I think is right, my definition of right, which means it didn't meet my expectations. It's the same thing. So essentially, what is it that kicks in? That frustration. And that frustration is, it's a degree of anger. It comes under the heading of anger. So anger isn't just rage. Rage is like a big end result, but that little irritation, in fact, even boredom that sets in with young people, that sort of thing, oh, I'm bored, that kids come out with. It's a there's an irritation there. There's an irritation that's brewing because nothing's happening. Of course things are happening, but I want more to happen. I want excitement, or something, right? I'm looking for something. I'm chasing something, Anyway, when it does happen, and it doesn't happen according to my expectations, then that frustration kicks in, and that's a type of anger. So the more of that we experience, we're either going to express it, we're going to speak about it compulsively. I guess we're talking about would be a negative thing. To mention how I feel, that would be a lot more positive. That would be like informing someone, But to suppress it, that's another thing. People sometimes are afraid of saying how they feel, for instance, and so they suppress it. They swallow, they count to 10 and then try to forget it, So basically that is going to build up pressure within. And that pressure is ultimately going to burst something. The more I suppress, the more pressure there is going to be within me. And then sometimes what happens is a person bursts out, and then they say, well, what else could I do? I was under this pressure. But of course, they had the habit of bottling things up. And it may have been out of fear. It may have initially been out of some sort of respect, but I would say the respect needs to be looked at a little bit, because the fear factor is definitely, sort of masquerading as respect to some degree there. We need to learn, I guess, in some cases, because we haven't necessarily learned as children how to positively express ourselves and our feelings, so that other people understand. Yeah. Like, when is appropriate to do that? How is it appropriate to do that? In what company is it appropriate to do that? And so on, because you don't want to just blurt something out to someone in front of someone else, and then that becomes a big embarrassment. So, that's a big fail mark. Yeah. So repressed is a different thing in a way. It's where we hide it. We swallow hard and we stuff it down underneath, and it becomes like a denial. It becomes denial. What problem? No, there's no problem, So we maintain a hard shell on the surface, and we don't even know anymore that there is a problem happening within. So that's repression, and obviously it gets very dangerous when things are like that, and yet it actually is very common. So All of these things are tied in with the notion of anger, frustration, and so on. And frustration totally linked to expectations. Frustration and expectations hand in hand, right? So, life beyond expectations. We will want for nothing, and yet we will have everything. Now that sounds like huge. How on earth do we do that? How do we go beyond expectations? How do we get to a point where we have no sense of want for something and it's like everything is fulfilled? All our desires are fulfilled, and actually we didn't have any desires to be fulfilled. It's like a funny, odd sort of a paradox. So rising above expectations. I have somewhere here in my background a nice little pic I thought I'd put in, right? Okay, we are used to seeing the world in a certain way, and we're all trained slightly differently, and some of us have more of a positive notion of what's going on around us and within us and everything, and others less so. Others have that sort of cynical, expecting the worst type of notion, doom and gloom. But whatever the case, how do we learn the art of being positive, basically, and not expecting anything out of anyone? Often we hide our expectations, or hide the problem of expectations behind the notion of, well, if I didn't have any expectations, no one would do nothing or do anything for me, right? It's like if I didn't expect anything out of my children, then my children wouldn't, achieve anything in life. But actually, it is quite different, because it's not that by freeing myself of expectations, I would stop training my children in how to live a good life. No, I would actually learn to train them through love, not through fear. If I have expectations, my tendency will be to try and train my children through fear. If you don't do this, then you will never have a good life. If you don't do this, I won't love you. You won't have your father's respect, or whatever it happens to be. That's sort of a typical notion. But rising above that requires a bit of work there. So this is really where the whole act of meditation, which I guess we're going to be doing in a little while, but the whole act of meditation comes into play, because we're starting to train our mind to think in a certain way. In some ways, that's what meditation is about, right? We're training our mind to think in a different way. So I like this picture of the hot air balloon here, because it's like going above the world and having the opportunity to look down on the world. And what do you see? You see the city that you live in, or the place where you live, and you see that from that level, from that high up in the sky, it's so small. It's like those mountains there, Those mountains are covered in trees, but do you actually see trees? Or do you see a sort of a rug covering the ground? It's like a rug, isn't it? It's like a really nice rug, covering the ground. And so, it's the same for our lives. If we look back down on our life and think, gosh, that's where everything takes place down there. And it's not just in my house, it's next door and next door to that and next door to that and down the road and round the corner and, everyone else as well, And so this is like a sort of a bird's eye view on everything, and the astronauts, the first astronauts that went up into space, some of them had really profound experiences of the world and their lives and so on. They they look back at planet Earth and they thought, oh my God, that's where everything that's taken place in our history books has occurred. Right? That's where everything I know and have ever known is. It's all down there on that ball in space, you know. So this notion of going up and above and beyond all of those little things makes us see them more accurately and put them all into perspective more accurately. So I think on that note, I might just leave it there and ask if maybe anyone out there has any questions. And I think probably Dimple herself may even have a few up her sleeve.
Really wonderful. I learned so much, and it was so nice about the difference between suppression and repression, and not realizing sometimes we repress ourselves. So, as what you said, suppress ourselves, and denial. That word is really like we live, nothing happened, we just go into denial, and that's so beautifully said. And it's really, you don't realize it when it happens, but as you hear and when you realize, like what you said, it's just like, oh, was I in denial? You start questioning yourself. And I think the meditation practice makes you more aware of yourself and then questions you. Lovely. And Mr. Peter, I would love you to share your personal experiences. I'm sure you have a bag of experiences and something that we could take more from you. So many years being in meditation, practicing it from teenager, from a very young age. I think you have a lot more to share with us.
Okay, if I were to just think on the spot even, expectations are within us and they're all around us from other people. I suppose my own experience of my family. When I started meditation, I decided that what I wanted to do with my life was help run the organization. And I basically made that decision pretty much in the first few months. Probably in less than 6 months, I was fairly clear on this idea that I wanted to teach it and I wanted to help run the organization somehow and share all of this with others. Now, one thing that I understood very clearly was that one doesn't make a living out of doing that. This organisation is a not-for-profit organisation and it's run totally by volunteers and run off voluntary donations. So I was going to, in a sense, need to be able to lead a double life, but I needed to bring those two lives together so that they weren't really separate. So definitely there were initially expectations from my family. I would say, there's no two ways about it. My parents would have loved at that point for me to become like an architect or an industrial designer or something like that. Because that was the sort of area where my leanings lay. I was a musician too, and that was my own thing. On one side I could draw, on the other side I could play music. So, I was sort of torn between those two things in a way, my visual sense and my auditory sense, So, but as far as my parents were concerned, they would love for me to have had a successful life in that way. Now, I remember in those days I was confronted once by one of my sisters. I'm the eldest in the family, but this sister was 2 years younger than me, the next sibling down, Aunt Liz. And Liz was a very fiery number. She challenged everything in life. And one day she challenged me about vegetarianism. And did I think I was better than the rest of them? And all of that sort of thing, And we had a discussion over it, and, a very frank discussion. And I really tried to tell her as best I could at that time how, this was really where my heart was, and it wasn't a question of what other people did with their lives and what they wanted to eat and all of that. This was how I wanted to lead my own life, and so on. And we had this discussion, and because of Liz, actually, because of the way she was the one in the family who then stuck up for me in my diet, not just my diet, all my lifestyle choices and everything. She was the one who was always behind that. And it was because I managed, a worthwhile discussion with her one day when she was in that mood where she was going to challenge me over everything. And that was her nature. She had to challenge everything. But once she got convinced over something, then she would stick up for it to the day she died. So I think in a way I just had to stick, by my guns, but by my chopsticks perhaps, to give an Eastern, analogy there, or, metaphor. The other one would be, I guess, from my work colleagues. I find when I get into a discussion with work colleagues about why I choose simply to work part-time, because I looked for a job which was part-time only, and I wanted that so that I could fit the two things in my life. I'm just honest about it, and the fact that I do other things and what I'm into. And I'm cautious about that because I don't ever proselytize at work, or to my work colleagues. I only really tell them what they seem to be interested in, and that's always been a different affair with every single person that I've met. So quite often in that sort of sphere, my employer at one point was expecting me to work longer and so on, and I just stood by my guns, and in the end they backed down and they gave me what I wanted, a part-time secure position, and it worked out. So they're just a couple of examples.
Very nice, very nice. I liked also the point where you said we underestimate our potential, we expect the worst. And truly that, instead of empowering us, it actually makes us go down. And, we feel like we are not capable, or, that really leads to very negative impressions on us. And it's so beautifully said. And that was something I really liked, that we should not be expecting the worst. In fact, why shouldn't we expect the best? Please do share some childhood experiences of yours that could enlighten us further, expecting. I'm sure, like what you said, parents have expectations out of us. Sometimes we do things out of peer pressure, our friends expect,
Sure.
and we want to do it just because we want to please them.
Yeah. Goodness. I suppose that one of the first things there is, all right, expecting the worst that you were asking about. I think a lot of people give the excuse that if I expect something very low level, then I'll be nicely surprised when something better happens. And that often does happen, you see, to set your bar low and then have the expectation exceeded is always a nice thing. But because, if I have the habit of thinking in a cynical way, then even if the bar level gets exceeded, then my happiness that I derive from that, even though it comes, it's very short-lived. It'll be very short-lived because my habit of cynicism will quickly kick back in, and I will sort of move back into the mode of but don't you let up now just because you've had this has turned out well. Don't think that it's going to turn out well every time, So sometimes, we use this notion that if I set the bar low, that it'll be higher than the bar, and so I will feel better about it. And the opposite occurs too, that if I set the bar too high, that I will then have an incredible sense of disappointment when it's not met. Yeah. And I think that's a fear that people have. We set our own bar sometimes, we would have set our own bar too high and then not met that expectation. And so then we would have started to, we might have tried that again and had another failure and again and had another failure. So then we started to set the bar low and say, oh, see, this is what happens every time I fail, or you fail, whatever it is, And, so then that different syndrome takes over. We're expecting low. But, the happiness that comes if that level of expectation is exceeded is only ever short-lived, because the habit is there of dissatisfaction, unhappiness and cynicism basically ruling my worldview and view of the human race and so on, and view of certain others in my life. Yeah. So that was a big question there.
We have a couple of questions here from the audience, and I'll read out some to you here. I'll read one by one. Expectation is also a yardstick of a result. They say, should we have expectations or not? And maybe, I'll complete the question, maybe have expectations, but having to also having ability to go. Isn't it a target for me to achieve? You got the question?
Yeah. It's two different things. It's two different things. I can decide what I would like to achieve, what I think I'm capable of achieving in a realistic fashion, and then set out to achieve that, And I don't need to threaten myself by saying, and if I don't achieve it, I will not feel happy with myself. Because in a sense, that sort of spells out this notion that if I don't achieve it, I will be a failure of a human being, And we do that to ourselves. And of course, we've had it done to us by others, and primarily by parents. And we may well be doing the same thing to our own children. And it kills everything. It just kills everything. So, have confidence in the self, have confidence in others around us, but don't expect that, and don't expect that I will have to get that far, because then basically what I'm saying is that I will then judge myself as a failure if I don't reach that level. And don't place those same expectations on others too, because I'm saying to them that, hey, you have to achieve this, otherwise I'm going to label you as a failure. Now, if that's coming from a parent, that is no small thing whatsoever.
That beautifully.
If it's coming from a partner or a friend even, it's no small thing. And it certainly doesn't equal love. It's got nothing to do with it. So we need to learn how to go for it out of enthusiasm, out of zeal and happiness and so on. Without having the expectations.
That beautifully leads us into our next question, which is linked to this, what you just mentioned. It said, Peter, can you tell us more about self-respect? And how do we overcome the lack
Wow.
of self-respect? And when
Yeah.
we don't feel respected or good about good enough for others. So it's self-respect and
Yeah.
also others.
Yeah. When we don't feel good enough about others, don't
First
have
they
respect
ask,
for others, meaning
no, first they ask about self-respect. Tell us more about
self-respect.
self-respect. And then how do you overcome the lack of self-respect? And it continues to when we don't feel respected or good enough for others. We don't have the
Oh, I
self-respect.
see.
We don't feel good enough
That's
for.
right. Yeah, yeah. So all of that is based on that sense of what happens when I don't feel respected by others. Not feeling, I'll start at that end of it actually, not feeling respected by others and having a feeling of sadness, sadness and just a general bad feeling about the self based on what others think of me. That is all to do with not having self-respect. So how do we get self-respect? Basically, remember first of all that it can be a very long-standing habit to have a very low sense of self-esteem and a low sense of worth, of the self. Okay, so in order to get self-respect, because we can't respect others until we have self-respect, actually. So real self-respect is based on the notion of soul consciousness. The problem has been that we are fully trained up in this notion of thinking of ourselves as being a physical body, and we label ourselves in that way. I am this person who is this nationality, this profession, married to this person, child of this person, these are my qualifications, this is my life experience, etc., etc., etc. And we've learned to base our sense of self-respect on all of these things. They're all associated to the whole notion of my physical role in the world. But actually what we do need to do is transfer the sense of self-respect over onto the notion of the soul. That actually I'm not a physical being, I am a soul. I am a spiritual being. And as a soul, I am eternal. As a soul, my original quality is peace. As a soul, I am not the roles that I am playing in this world. So I'm a being of light. I am an eternal being. There are lots of things in our meditation where we transfer this sense of respect for the self over onto a more spiritual notion. And that spiritual notion is far more solid, because everything else in the world around us that's associated to physical things changes daily, So if we're basing our sense of self-respect on my career, being successful in my career, being successful in my marriage, having my children successful in their careers and their marriages, on whether or not I've lived up to my parents' expectations, all of these things are associated to the role. And if my sense of self-respect is based on those things, then they're liable to fall apart. It's liable, rather, to fall apart at any time. If your marriage falls apart, then you fall apart. If your sense of self-respect is based on your marriage, But pull back from that. Learn how to run a successful marriage. Learn how to run successful relationships with other human beings, other souls, in fact. on a spiritual level. Still manage the roles that you play in the world, but change them into a more spiritual thing. That's how we start to get a solid sense of self-respect. It's based on the identity of the soul.
Very, very beautiful. And actually, we have a couple more questions here, but we're running short of time. I'll just, in a minute, if you could share with us, you had an accident, we believe, some time back, and how did you deal with it? You could, give us an answer and lead us into your meditation experience. And I picked up something. You're a very good musician, I hear. So we would love to hear something from you. So please share your experience and lead us some reflection.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Wow, the accident, how did I deal with it? The big thing I'm definitely going to finish on here is just that notion of soul consciousness. So yes, I was run over by a car once and had probably half my ribs broken. The first and foremost notion there is that even though I feel pain, I am not the body. I am the soul. I am wearing a body. Sure, pain receptors, they're feeding pain back to the brain, right? Those pain receptors are telling the brain that I'm feeling dramatic pain. Now, that obviously we need to be practiced in this before the accident occurs. I can't suddenly decide, oh, okay, now I think I'm a soul, No, we need to, if we're practiced in life on this point, then we'll deal with it successfully when it happens. Yeah. And then on the side of being a musician, I think probably what I'd like to do is just simply use my voice in a meditation commentary. Not so much a singing thing. It's probably the best thing I can do right at the moment. Is that what you're intending, Dimple?
Sure, Peter, take it away and give us what you have. We have no expectations, I think, and let's take this to the next level.
Okay. Look, I might just even change my background again, just for the sake of the meditation. So, primarily, I was a guitarist. That was my training in my life. But then I realized that I also wanted to sing because I felt like I had something to sing about. I was never a sing in the shower sort of a person, right? And I never had any voice training. Voice training wasn't my thing. But it did come about in a more natural sense. In the course of my life, I've used my voice in so many different ways. So, okay, if you'd like to share in this little meditation experience with me, it'll be just a few minutes. And whether or not you're an experienced meditator, just relax yourself right where you sit. Just be as relaxed as you can. And don't be too worried about the rest. Even if there are little aches and pains, don't be concerned. You're here to manage those things. They won't just disappear. They won't just disappear, but your sense of happiness, your sense of peace, your sense of well-being, your sense of prosperity in life, having everything you need. All of that comes about in the strength of knowing and experiencing that I am a soul. I am not this physical being. I am a soul. Imagine yourself as a shining point of light in the center of your own forehead. You're not physical. It's like you're suspended between the particles of matter. And you have a sort of a cosmic link with the brain of the body. You transmit your thought power to the body, even without knowing really how you do it. It just happens. Almost like operating a TV set. You just turn it on and it goes, and you know how to change the channel, you know how to turn it up, turn it down, but you don't really know how that actually happens. It just happens. When you drive a car, you know how to drive the car, but quite often you don't really know everything that's going on there, inside, under the bonnet, in the electrical system, etc. So you, the soul, are at peace. Just allow yourself to experience peace. Observe the world around you. If your eyes are open, don't look at things. Just allow the entire visual in front of you to be as if it's in your peripheral vision only, your surrounding vision, not in your focus. But just remember who you are, who is seeing through the eyes, hearing through the ears. You, the soul, making your body function. You, the soul, the eternal being, the beautiful, pure, glowing energy, eternal, sparkling light. You can bring this experience into your life at any time, wherever you sit, wherever you stand, wherever you lay. Just bring into your experience this awareness. The growing awareness then will become a very deep experience. Thank you.
Thank you. So beautiful, so relaxing, so calming. We are a soul, and that is what matters the most. And having set with all the expectations to revise and put them right, that is the best thing I learned and picked up from your program. And it's really a pleasure. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Dimple. Thanks so much for having me on. I enjoyed it.
We would love to have you again, and with more questions this time. And now I would like to announce our next program for you from Meditation Cafe. We are programmed to have you, Sister Clegg, upcoming program on 11th of June, 2022, 5 to 6:15, same time. Now, this is based on enhancing mental health. I believe this is something, especially in these current times, mental health is really on the rise, and I believe this talk will be beneficial to every one of you. With a plant-based diet, can changing diet actually help us mentally. This is from Sister Clegg from Canada, and she's a qualified chef, a natural health enthusiast, meditation practitioner as well. Our second announcement, all our current and past recordings are all available for you on YouTube. If you wish to receive any updates of our future programs, please do WhatsApp 016-603-8205. The number is on your screen. You could take a snapshot. You also have it on YouTube and on Facebook. Visit us on learnmeditationonline.org. So with this, I would like to actually invite all of you to turn on your video, turn on your cameras, and if we could say goodbye to Peter, and it will be nice for all of us. You can switch on your cameras. Thank you, Peter. And we would love to see all your wonderful faces. So please switch on your camera, take the power, look into the speaker, and we would love to see all of you too. So.
Wow.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much.
Nice to see you all.
Thank you for joining all of us. And until our next program, see you next month. And Meditation Cafe is here to serve you all and bring you whatever that you request. Thank you.